But he was all right, you know. He was all right because he had tremendous courage.
How so?
Well, if he believed in something, he would go the distance, what gamblers describe as going the distance, which is a great quality in a showman.
Yeah.
And I was eternally grateful to him for what he did for me, because I had a musical only a few doors away from here, Around the World in 80 Days. And I had to open in Boston. I had a lot of costumes waiting. Did I tell you this story?
No.
I had a lot of costumes waiting in the railway station, which couldn't go from the railway station to the theater, about 8 blocks away. This was in Boston, where we were opening, unless somebody paid Brooks Costume Company $47,000. And we didn't have $47,000 because originally we had a producer called Mike Todd who had gone broke. And I had done that terrible scene in movies where he said, "Come on, kids," you know. George Murphy used to always do that, and Gene Kelly, people like that say, "Come on, kids, we'll get the show on anyway." You know, that terrible thing. And I did that. I heard myself speaking these terrible, corny lines, and there I was stuck with $350,000 worth of show that I had to get on somehow. And a lot of things happened trying to get it on. Can I tell one story parenthetically before getting to that?
Sure.
The man who wrote the music was Cole Porter. And everybody said, "Don't have Cole Porter because he's written out," you see. And in fact, he'd written a couple of not very successful shows just before that. And I said, nobody with all that genius could possibly be written out. And I did the show with him, and he wrote a complete score, not one note of which was ever heard on radio or indeed on the lips of anybody wishing to whistle their way up the aisle out of the theater. And the next show he wrote was Kiss Me, Kate. So you see, I'd had a little bit of bad luck. And stuck in Boston with a musical without a single song and needing $47,000 before curtain time, I found myself in the box office trying to think of who could send me this money. And I thought Harry Cohn, who I hardly knew. And I called him up on the long-distance phone. I said, "Harry Cohn, this is Orson Welles. I've just read a book," and I turned a paperback around, which the girl had in front of her was selling tickets, and I said, "It's called something or other." It wasn't a lady from Shanghai then, just this. "Buy it, and I will make it for you if you'll send me $47,000 in 2 hours." And he did.
Gee.
And that's how the picture was made.
If no book had been lying there, it would have been...
So he's lamented as far as I'm concerned.
Gee, that's good. We wait for a moment. We have a message. We'll be right back. Are you ever going to write, may I call you Orson again?
Oh, my goodness. Wouldn't it be ridiculous if you didn't?
All right. Are you ever going to do a biography of yourself?
Well, I don't think a biography, because nowadays there's if you buy somebody's life story, they expect an awful lot of the sort of material that I don't tell anybody, you know, much less whoever would have the price of a book. I think one's privacy is invaded enough without doing it to oneself. But I would like sometime to write a book of with memoirs, an awful pompous word, but on subjects that interest me and about people I've known and liked, rather than and disasters and pleasures that I've had and all that, but not a 1, 2, 3 ABC. You know, one sunny morning in Kenosha, a chubby little one. You know.
I do know.
You know, that kind of thing.
You know, your childhood though does interest me. I really envy it. The idea. I never got to Europe until my present age, and a lot of people don't ever get there. And the thought of a child being taken there over and over as a kid, when was the earliest you went?
Well, I've spent my whole life kind of gypsying around. My father lived in Peking for quite a long time, and I spent 5 or 6 years there, or the greater part of those years. He stayed in Peking just because the living was easy there. You know, he liked to live au prince, in a very grand way, and he was born with a lot of bread and cast it on the waters, and it failed to return. And the only way he could really live it up was in Peking, where you could have 400 servants and give dinner parties with gold plate and have columns of ice with trees of orchids frozen into them for a mere pittance, relatively speaking. And that's what brought us to Peking, and I was sent to Europe at a very early age on trips, first with other little boys and then by myself, totally without any guidance. The idea was you've got to learn to be on your own. That had happened to my father when he was about 10.
How little,
and he
then?
did it to me. At 10 was the first time I actually traveled alone in Europe with just so much money tied into my jeans, and there I went, you know.
Did that seem romantic and exciting?
Terribly romantic.
Yeah.
Terribly romantic. What seemed even more romantic to me were all the expensive hotels and restaurants I couldn't afford to get into on the amount of money they thought I should learn to get along on.
Can you remember?
That didn't seem a bit picturesque.
I guess not. Can you remember meeting people then that you realized later the significance of, if you know what I mean? I mean,
no, because I think I realized then.
You did?
Yeah, people told me, and I was very impressed by great people and interesting people as a kid. Mm-hmm. I was very interested in older people, unlike most young people are indeed.
That is odd for a kid. You didn't have little friends that you played with.
I had little friends who if they were big enough, chased me around the block, and little friends who, if they were meek enough, I bullied. But it was always pretty much of a battle in the contemporary scene. And I was always scared of teenagers.
Why?
I hated them before I was in my teens. I thought they were insane.
Yeah.
And after I spent all my teens pretending not to be in my teens, but in my 20s, and avoiding that age. And it's only recently, since the teenagers have become the rulers and sovereigns of the world, that I've changed my opinion. But until this very latest generation, I have been very strongly of the conviction that there are periods during one's adolescence when one is feverishly insane.
Well said.
That's been changed, however, now.
You have certain sympathy now with that age.
More than sympathy. I'm grateful to them even for their fever.
We have a message, and we will be right back after that. Please stay where you are.